The first reason why you should try new things in bed and new sex positions is because novelty is really important, especially in ultra long-term committed relationships like marriage. You don't want your monogamy to turn into monotony.
You're listening to Get Your Marriage On, the fun and spicy podcast bringing you new tools and fresh ideas so that you can be the sexiest couple you know.
Hello, my friend. Welcome to the Get Your Marriage On podcast, and I am so excited to talk about this topic today, about sex positions. A few years ago, my wife and I were sitting in bed. We just had put the kids to bed, and we're just having our time. And we had the laptop, on our lap. We opened it, and we're both really nervous as we type in this web address to a quote-unquote Christian-friendly sex position website that my friend had just told me about. Now, we both grew up in a home where sex wasn't talked about a lot. If anything, it was the thou shalt not conversation or the biological reproduction conversation. And everything else is kind of left unsaid, implying that it really wasn't right to go seek out information about sex in your relationship. But I just had this conversation with a friend that told me about this great website, christianfriendlysexpositions.com, and how it has, stick figure drawings, so you kind of get a general idea of what to do in bed without it being overly pornographic or something like that. And I was really curious, and I just really struggled knowing if it was right or not. So my wife and I, we decided, hey, we'll give it a try. If we don't like it, we can always shut down the laptop or whatever. And we pull up the site, we scroll through a few things, and she's like, hey, that would be fun to try. And I'm like, yeah, that would be fun to try. And then we find another one like, I wonder how we do this. And it just opened up this whole world of creativity for us because up until that point, sex pretty much looked the same, pretty much the same position, same way every time. And we didn't know what we were missing out on. And allowing ourselves to have this new world of creative options for us to enjoy each other sexually, it gave us a sense that creativity is totally allowed in the bedroom, especially when it comes to sex. And we tried some positions, and some of them were complete flops. Others were fantastic and great, and some of our go-to favorites to this day. I know you've been asking for it for a long time. We finally added sex positions to the Intimately Us app, and a lot of you love it. If you don't know about it yet, there's this great app called Intimately Us, created by yours truly. When you download it and you go to this Discover section, the very first option that shows up for you is sex positions. And we have over 100 of these tastefully drawn stick figure drawings of different sex positions. And it gives you a lot of ideas how to be more creative in the bedroom as far as connecting sexually. It's March Madness in the United States. This is a NCAA college basketball tournament. And a lot of people create brackets where they guess ahead of time which teams are going to win and come out on top in this great tournament. We thought we'd have some fun, so we created a sex position bracket for March Madness Bedroom Edition. If you follow us on social media or newsletter or read our blog, you can see this PDF that you can download and print for yourselves, and you and your spouse can go through and create basically your own bracket. You can pit different sex positions you want to try against each other and see if there's a new one that you want to try. So to celebrate sex positions in the Intimately Us app and also March Madness Bedroom Edition, I wanted to record a special podcast episode all about sex positions today. First, we're going to talk about why sex positions and why it's important to have these conversations around and how to have these conversations about it with your spouse. And then we'll dive through a few specifics on sex positions and how you can make sex more exciting, creative, and most importantly, connecting for you and your relationship. A week ago, I printed out the March Madness Bedroom Edition bracket for my wife and I to fill out. Now there's 16 spaces. We pulled out the Intimately Us app. We started writing down 16 sex positions that we usually don't do on our paper, the things that we want to try. And it's been kind of a really fun exercise to go through them and try new things. And we're learning a lot about ourselves. We're also having a lot of fun. And we're learning a lot about sex positions in the process. One thing I've learned is if you're to categorize sex positions, first of all, one great way to categorize it is ask yourself the question, who's in control here? It's usually the person on top that has more control or more leverage or is doing more of the work or the motion in sex. So that's one thing to consider. Does he like to be in control? Does she like to be in control? Speaking of control, you can have a lot of fun in your relationship by playing with power. By power play, I'm meaning like putting one person who usually isn't really in charge in the relationship and give them a situation and sexually where they have a lot of the control and leverage. It's not an unusual pattern that I run into coaching couples where the spouse that seems to be more the dominant one outside of the bedroom, maybe they're the boss at work or boss of the home, or they're used to telling others what to do. When in sex, they switch and they actually really like being told what to do. They like being bossed around. So you can play with who's in charge, who has the leverage here, and this sense of power and control, a little bit of this, I'm going to use the words dominance and submission. I don't mean it in a cruel sense, but who's going to dominate in this sexual position and who's going to be the more submissive one? You can play with these power dynamics to create this really fun sexual experience together. The other thing that we keep in mind as we filled out our paper is pleasure in different areas. Some women really respond well to deep penetration and others hate it. Some people love G-spot stimulation and others hate it. Some people love a lot of direct clitoral stimulation, and I don't know very few women that hate it, but you get the point. Where that stimulation is happening and how it's happening and the different angles will have a different pleasure response depending on your body geometry, body size, shape, and perhaps even time of the month. So there's a lot of factors to consider when choosing sex positions. Now, when we move into sex and are enjoying a particular sex position, we have this agreement that we're going to focus on our own pleasure in the moment and not try to be overly fixated on a performance or what our other spouse might be thinking about the way we move or about our body or the different angles or things like that. Those all distract from enjoying the moment together. If my wife were to think like, does my butt look big from this angle the whole time? She's not going to get into it and enjoy that sex position. Pleasure is also a really important part of sex for us, so we're not shy to use a lot of lubricant or bring in a vibrator or sex toy or something else to kind of enhance the experience so that it's something we both enjoy and get a lot out of. I've read this really helpful book by the author Lou Paget. It's called The Big O Orgasms, How to Have Them, Give Them, and Keep Them Coming. And I'm using a lot of the information I learned from this book in this podcast episode today. Research shows that women who have the most orgasms in sex include a lot of direct clitoral stimulation. Only 30% of women can orgasm from just penetration, intercourse alone. So there needs to be a lot of clitoral stimulation somehow. A lot of sex positions lend themselves to a lot of clitoral stimulation. Now, of course, there's manual stimulation, using your hands to stimulate her clitoris, but oral stimulation is one of the most popular and reliable ways to bring a woman to orgasm in sex. There's a lot of different positions on how to do that. One new sex position I learned about oral sex is called the Kivin technique, and this is where the wife lies on her back with her legs gently apart, and the husband approaches her from the side, from like her left side or her right side, whichever side she's a little more sensitive on. Not from her legs. So in the way, if you look from the top down on the bed, it's like forming a capital T. So he stimulates her with his tongue, but it's more across her body from one thigh to another thigh instead of like from the feet to the head. And this also allows him to get his right hand in there and can do some other touching with his right hand around her genitals. And also frees his left hand for breast stimulation, nipple stimulation, whatever. So kind of going at it at an angle is a great sex position to try if oral sex is something that you want to get better at or enjoy a little more in your marriage. A lot of women get a lot out of the cowgirl sex position. Cowgirl is when she is on top. This is where the man is on his back with his legs straight or slightly bent, and she climbs on top and he enters her. What makes this sex position great for women is a sense of control. She's the one in charge of the movement, so she can set the tone and the rhythm for what feels good to her. Now, a lot of success in this sex position isn't coming from this up and down motion, but more of a grinding motion when she rubs the base of his penis against her clitoris or his pubic bone against her clitoris. And that's where a lot of the pleasure comes from. There's also the reverse cowgirl, which is when she faces his feet. And sometimes that's helpful because penises are all shaped differently. Some are perfectly straight when they're erect, some are curved a little to the left or the right, or up or down. Or some women just really enjoy the G-spot stimulation or the deep penetration. So you can play with these different angles by facing in a different direction. You can also enjoy the sex position without penetration. She can sit on his hips or on his waist, and she can use his penis and externally use it to rub against her vulva and her clitoris with her hands. There's another sex position kind of related, but this time the man is on his stomach instead of on his back, as if he's getting a massage, and she climbs on his back, on his hips, between his bottom, kind of near his tailbone. And if you have lubricant or massage oil, she can use that to glide around and really grind her clitoris into this part of his body. And for a lot of couples, it's really pleasurable for him to feel her on top of him like that, and really pleasurable for her, as she can often have an orgasm just from that grinding and repeated stimulation motion alone on her clitoris. There's other positions that lend itself really well for couples to enjoy sex in a very intimate way. You can get a chair and put it in your room. He can sit down first, and she can face him with her legs over his legs. So they're kind of in this intimate embrace. And with some penetration, there's not a lot of motion in sitting positions, but you can do a lot of grinding in that position or use a sex toy or something like that to add stimulation. If she sits back a little bit further, she can hold his penis and manually stimulate herself with the tip of his penis, like you would using a paintbrush. Those are sex positions that a lot of women find very erotic because you can get really close and personal that way. She can also face the opposite direction, and with some penetration, get a lot of pleasure out of G-spot stimulation that way. And he can wrap his arms around her and manually stimulate her breasts, her vulva, and other areas that you both really enjoy touching. You can also, if you don't have a chair, do a lot of these sex positions on the edge of the bed too. Speaking of which, there's also the rear entry positions. A lot of people call it doggy style. I personally don't like that term, so instead I call it stallion style. I think that feels more powerful. And in this position, usually the husband has the control, but there are some modifications you can make to give the woman more control. A lot of men love this position. It feels powerful. It feels new. They like the tight feeling it feels around their penis from this angle. A lot of women enjoy it too, especially if they really like G-spot stimulation. And she can change the angle of the stimulation of the penis in her vagina by arching her back, by raising and lowering her arms or getting down on her elbows. And there's other things you can do to make this position really pleasurable and fun for both. The downside to this is a lot of couples say it doesn't feel very intimate. I don't have a lot of eye contact with my spouse in this position. One solution is if you can get a large mirror, put it on the ground or somewhere near where you're having sex. You can both use this mirror and look into each other's eyes while in this position, and it can feel very intimate. Or if you're ever at a hotel and they have a large mirror on the wall, just saying, it can be really exciting. Some sex positions lend themselves really well for when you just want something a little more chill. And one is called the scissors position. This is where you're laying side to side. And how it starts is the wife lies flat on her back with her legs apart. And he enters her from the side, but he's going to put one of her legs between his legs and his leg over her leg. It's kind of hard to describe. But from the bed to the top, it goes her leg, her leg, his leg. And so he's kind of twisted on his side. She's on her back. But it can be a really intimate position. You can eye gaze. And the nice thing about this position is he doesn't have to have a very strong erection to stay in that position. And you can add a lot of manual stimulation or a vibrator to make this fantastic for both of you too, in this kind of a position. Another popular position is called face sitting. And I think a better way to say it is more like face kneeling. And how this works is the husband will lay on his back with his head near the headboard of the bed. And she's going to straddle both sides of his head and lean up against the headboard. So she's supporting her body weight on the headboard and position herself so he can stimulate her orally. What makes this position great for oral sex is that she is in control. Because she's the one on top, she can control the angle where it's being stimulated. And for a lot of women, they find this a really powerful feeling. It's like they're sitting on this throne. They're the goddess, they're the majesty that this person is appealing to. And so it can be a pretty hot position. So a lot of women like that face sitting, aka face kneeling position. There's some other novelty sex positions, such as 69, wheelbarrow, Amazon, and more. Now, 69 for a lot of couples is fun to try, but it's not going to be their usual go-to. For a lot of couples, they have a really hard time with 69 because you're receiving and giving oral stimulation at the same time. Too much multitasking going on. You have to focus on receiving and giving, and it can get really distracting. Some ways couples adapt this is instead of one body on top of the other, they'll do it sideways, or they'll take turns. Or she will manually stimulate him instead of orally stimulate him. For her, not needing to orally stimulate him kind of gives her a break and kind of can really enjoy the sensation while he still receives some stimulation too at the same time. So you can modify this novel sex position. Another novel sex position is wheelbarrow, where this is a rear entry position where you might start with her on all fours. The man enters her. Then she will wrap her legs around his waist while he holds her and then stands up. So it's like doing a wheelbarrow race. Her hands are on the ground and he's holding her by the legs as he stands up. This is fun to try and it might give her a head rush. It might be something you can do for a few seconds, but it really is just for fun and just to trying something new. And of course, you can modify any of these sex positions to do what you really want to get out of it. Another novelty sex position is the Amazon. This takes a lot of leg strength. You're doing a lot of squatting in these positions. So these are all kind of fun to do, and they're there for the sake of it because they're fun, not because they may or may not necessarily always be the thing that gets you off. But you might find it interesting that it might be the thing that gets you off because it's novel. There's some psychological arousal in it, more than just the physical arousal in it. And besides, it's kind of fun to try new crazy things once in a while. Now, I think the most underrated sex position of all is the missionary position. And unfortunately, the missionary position gets a lot of flack. Some people call it boring. But the reason why the missionary sex position is usually the go-to sex position for many couples is because it can be incredibly intimate. I mean, you're face to face. You can kiss each other's neck and lips and ears. You have access to each other's breasts and nipples. You have a lot of things you can do to make this great. So there's some modifications you can make too in this position that even just the slightest movement can change the way it works. For example, for the man, instead of thrusting in and out in this position, he can focus on grinding, like moving his body side to side, like a hula dancer. You can try it with one leg in, one leg out, or with his legs both on the outside or something like that. She can wrap her legs around his waist in this position and arch her back a bit. You can put pillows under her bottom to see if that helps with deeper stimulation that she likes. There's a lot of modifications you can make to the missionary position. I hope some of these ideas help kind of spark some ideas of fun things you want to try. I've only just mentioned a few. Now, there's a lot more you can do, and they're all available in the Intimately Us app. You hit Discover and under Sex Positions. And I encourage you to pull out the March Madness sheet and start filling it out with your spouse and seeing if there's some fun sex positions you can try, and you might discover something new that you actually really like. Earlier this week, I polled our Instagram audience about what they thought about sex positions, and this is what I learned. The first question I asked couples is, how many sex positions are in your repertoire when you have sex? And 85% responded 1 to 3 positions. They just have these 1, 2, or 3 positions that are their go-to, and that's pretty much where they stick to when they have sex. Yet, when I asked how many of you want to try something new, like new positions to add to your repertoire, 80% was an enthusiastic, yes, I want to try more new positions in bed. So obviously there's a little bit of a disconnect, it seems like. A lot of couples stick to somewhere between 1 to 3 positions when they have sex, yet there's a lot of desire to expand that, to try new things, new horizons, and find new ways that are more pleasurable and connecting for them. I asked my Instagram audience, what are your top objections to trying new things like sex positions in bed? And there are a lot of really helpful and insightful answers, but I boil them down to 3 main categories. The first is concerns about body size. A lot of people talked about, I'm overweight, I can't try new things because, I have a big body and things like that. The second objection is, it's awkward. It's awkward to talk about sex with my spouse. It's awkward to look up, information about how we can make sex better and things like that, which I can totally understand and relate to. The third objection was, related to performance, such as fear of ejaculating too soon, sex being over too quick, or at the other end of the spectrum, sex taking too long, erectile dysfunction, and other concerns around that. I think all of these objections are valid. And I hope by the end of today's episode, you'll be a little more motivated to overcoming some of whatever objections you might have and to trying new things and new ways for you and your spouse to connect and experience more pleasure in bed. The first reason why you should try new things in bed and new sex positions is because novelty is really important, especially in ultra long-term committed relationships like marriage. You don't want your monogamy to turn into monotony. Besides, who wants to eat the same food every day or wear the same clothes for the rest of their life? We like variety in life. Generally speaking, in your relationship, you're going to have one spouse that is more interested in novelty, new experiences, than the other. And that difference is not a problem. In fact, it's okay. In fact, without one person wanting to push more novelty than the other, you'd probably both never seek for more novelty in the relationship. So embrace the difference and move forward with it. In a study in the Journal of Animal Science in 1996, there was a study published about rams mating with ewes. This must have been a really fun study to be a part of because they were measuring how long it takes for a ram to ejaculate when copulating with a ewe. And what they found is when a ram mates with the same ewe over and over, they take longer to ejaculate. And then they pair that ram with a new ewe, pun intended, that ram ejaculated much faster. So in a way, I think we tend to find more sexual excitement in new sexual experiences. And that's also why it's important to switch things up once in a while to have more novelty. More novelty often means stepping outside your comfort zone. One way to think about it is if you go to the gym and your weight trainer is telling you to lift 1 pound dumbbells, something really easy and light, and do that over and over again, you're probably not going to get a lot of your workout. But if they tell you to go lift the 300-pound dumbbell or something that's way above your limit and you try to do that, you'll either end up frustrated or injured, and that's not helpful either. So there's a sweet spot in the middle where a good trainer will take you right to kind of where you are, but push you just a little bit outside of that. And that's kind of that zone where a lot of the muscle building growth can occur. I think this metaphor works really well for our sexual development. It takes courage to step a little bit outside of our comfort zone, but not so far out there that we'll be traumatized by the experience, but just a little bit. And that will give you the courage to try more novel things at healthy doses to keep that marriage fresh and alive and exciting. Now, it doesn't mean you have to like it. Just because you try something doesn't mean you have to enjoy it. So give yourself a lot of grace and say, I'm willing to try this. I may not like it, but who knows? You might end up really liking it too. And you'll never know unless you're willing to give it a try. The second principle about how to make new sex positions great is actually something I learned from my daughter. She was recently in a youth-only production of The Music Man, the Broadway show. And there was a big difference between the way she performed on the opening night and on the closing night. At the very first opening night, she was nervous. They kind of stumbled over lines a little bit, and you can tell that kind of affected their energy on stage. Compared to their last night, Even if there was a stumble or two, you can't tell because of their enthusiasm and the energy that they had in delivering their lines, just thoroughly enjoying the play together. I think the same principle applies in the bedroom. There's so much about the awkwardness of sex and bodies and messes and everything. But when you can be really enthusiastic about it and also have fun, play. This is a playground for adults. It makes a big difference in the way things turn out. It's not about skill. It's not about performance. It's about enthusiasm. Can you really get into it and enjoy it? That's what it's about. Which leads me to my third principle, and that is to embrace the awkward part of sex. Now, let's be honest, sex is really awkward. I mean, you're both naked, you're giggling, you're cold, you're hot, there's just sweat. There's so much that can go wrong in sex, and I get it. It can be really awkward. There's also some parts of it that can kind of be embarrassing, like what if he loses his erection? Or what if during sex in a certain position, his penis slips out of her? Or what if one of you farts? Or let's not also forget about how sex can be really messy sometimes. I mean, there's body fluids, there's a lot of sweat, sometimes there's a lot of saliva. And there's also the awkward part of what if you come too fast? Or what if you don't come at all? Now, having great sex isn't about great performance. And that's the first thing we need to eliminate from our minds. Great sex is really about enjoying each other and connecting and having some pleasure together. And yes, performance does play a little part, but it's not the main thing. Can you get comfortable enough just to embrace the awkwardness? If he slips out in a certain position, can you just laugh it off? Or if he loses his erection, can you just move on and be okay with it, knowing it'll likely return later on? These are just the fun things about the awkwardness of sex, and just integrate it into your experience and just be okay with it. Make it part of the fun. The next principle is being okay to talk about sex and about new positions you want to try. Now, I get a lot of questions about this, and this is one of the common objections that we had on our Instagram poll. It's the idea of it's awkward trying to bring up to my spouse that I want to try new things in bed. So what are some general tips on learning how to talk about it? A lot of people ask me, how can I not feel so awkward talking about it? And I don't have a great answer for that. Maybe someone else does. But I don't think the awkwardness ever goes away, but your capacity to deal with the awkwardness within yourself increases. You'll always feel a little awkward bringing up something sexually you want to try, partially because there's a little bit of hesitation, a little risk of rejection, and there's a lot of other things kind of connected to that idea. But if you don't bring things up, you'll never get a chance to enjoy the new things that you want to try. Related to that, though, is that feeling of awkwardness will still be there. It's just, can you tolerate it enough to be okay with that awkward feeling in your body when you talk about these things? Timing matters too. In the middle of sex, when you're both hot and heavy, is probably not the best time to say, hey, can we stop and look up this new sex position I want to try? It can be a total mood killer. Like, that's probably the worst time to do it. So timing is important. Maybe you can do things outside of the bedroom. You can just have a casual conversation on a walk or a drive or something to talk about something new you want to try. Now, if your spouse isn't enthusiastic about it, don't freak out. It's okay. People who do marriage well have this great perspective that marriage is the long game. And by that, I mean, they realize that marriage isn't just today. It means lots of days and weeks and months and years to follow. And I can kind of take a long-term approach to the things I do. So a no today doesn't necessarily have to mean it'll be a no forever. Another thing I run into in my coaching is I see a lot of self-rejection instead of actual rejection. And what I mean by this is I'll say, hey, how come you don't talk to your spouse about this thing you want to try? And they'll say, oh, because I already know what they're going to say. They're already going to say no to that. And I ask them, how do you feel? So, well, I kind of feel rejected. And it's interesting to me that they feel rejected. I mean, they've created that feeling in them already. They have rejected themselves before their spouse rejecting them. So I'd say get the courage, stop rejecting yourself, and bring up what you want to try. Dr. Robert Glover has these 3 rules, which I love. And his rules are, number 1, approach your spouse as if they're the most open-minded, most sexually adventurous person there is. Rule number 2, if they say no to what it is you want to bring up, don't fret about it and move on and be okay. And rule number 3, repeat rule number 1. And it just goes around and around. We also can't talk about great sex in the bedroom without mentioning that it happens in the context of a great relationship outside of the bedroom also. You need to remember to really focus on the relationship as a whole. Are you kind? Are you compassionate? Do you cherish and honor and value this wonderful person in your life? And do you show that outside of the bedroom? And are you affectionate in other ways too, besides just about sex? All these things are important factors in making sex great in the bedroom, and also ties into having the more confidence and courage in yourself to talk about things you want to try. The last principle I want to share with you is that meanings matter. Now, if you think back on your most memorable sexual experiences, I'm willing to wager that it had little to do with the pleasure or where you were or how your bodies geometrically were aligned, and had far more to do with how meaningful it was in that moment. For example, for myself, I can think of some of my top 3 best sexual experiences with my wife had to do with something in it that gave it this quality of transcendence, deep connection, feeling really seen and heard, seeing her in a new light, and feeling just in awe about us and our relationship and just what we're able to experience together. Those are all things that mean a lot to me. No matter what sex position you do, it's not really about what position you do that matters as much as it is what are the meanings that are coming from it. For example, a couple can have very vanilla sex, and I say that in air quotes, but end up having this tremendously deep, meaningful experience. Whereas another couple can be in the exact same sex position, and yet he is bored out of his mind or she feels taken advantage of. Like, it's not the position, it's the meanings you associate with it that matter a lot. So one way to make sex more meaningful, regardless of your position, is to, if you can, establish eye contact or verbal contact. Can you moan? Can you express somehow about how you're feeling in the moment? And also, can you include a good degree of psychological arousal? This is using your mind and your creativity to express ideas or themes that you both find very erotic and very interesting. These are all things that add more dimensions and layers to sex. Thank you for listening today. I hope you and your spouse are inspired to stretch outside your comfort zone and try new things in bed, to remember novelty and why it's so important, to be playful and have enthusiasm in your interactions, embrace the awkward side of sex, and just get more comfortable talking about it and making new meanings in sex. Try some new positions, try some fun things, and see if you find more pleasure and connection in the way you connect together. Now, if you'd like help in working through any of these things discussed today, I invite you to join my program called Next Level. It's a coaching program. Coaching meaning you get to work with me and others in helping you and your spouse take your intimacy, whatever level you're at, take it to the next level. You'll find more information about that on my website at getyourmarriageon.com. Click on coaching and then click next level. Now have a great week, and I'll talk to you next Friday.
We hope that you enjoyed this episode of Get Your Marriage On. And if you did, we would love it if you would take a few seconds to give us a rating on iTunes and to share the show with your friends. They'll thank you for life. Once you've done that, you can head over to getyourmarriageon.com for more resources about today's topic and to download our amazing marriage apps. Now go get your marriage on.